it doesn't mean that they didn't care about you or you weren't enough for them or that they didn't love you. You're just not thinking of it that way. I hope people realize that that's probably not true, that that person didn't love them.
Hey there, my name is Sharon, and this is Suicide Noted. On this podcast, I talk with suicide attempt survivors so that we can hear their stories. Every year around the world, millions of people try to take their own lives, and we almost never talk about it. We certainly don't talk about it enough, and when we do talk about it, many of us, including me, are not very good at it. So one of my goals with this podcast is to have more conversations and hopefully better conversations with survivors. I'm going to keep trying. A giant thanks to all the survivors who have joined me here on the podcast since we launched in July of 2020, and to everybody, all of you who listen. Really, thank you. If you are a suicide attempt survivor and you'd like to talk, please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com, on Facebook or Twitter @suicidenoted. You'll also see a few links in the show notes. The first is another way you can reach out by a recorded message. There are also a couple of links if you'd like to help us out with a financial contribution as we try to share these stories by these survivors with more people in more places and hopefully help them feel a little less shitty and a little less alone. And finally, you can help us out by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple. That really does help, and it only takes a minute or two. Now, we are talking about suicide on this podcast, as the title suggests, so please take that into account before or as you listen. But I do hope you listen, because there is so much to learn. Today, I am talking with Sharon. Sharon lives in Illinois, and she is a suicide attempt survivor. Hey, Sharon. What's going on?
Not much. Yeah, I've just had a little vacation from work. I've just been mostly trying to get things done. Staycation.
Nice. Staycation. All right. So it is Sharon who resides in the state of Illinois?
Correct.
I am, of course, curious. However you want to start this off, the Sharon story, where does it start? Oh, that's such a hard. Where does it start?
Well, I would say there were actually kind of two incidents that I wanted to talk about, if that's okay. The first one was after my divorce, which was really kind of unexpected and really hard on me. And I didn't know at the time that I think I had been seeing a therapist for anxiety, but I didn't know at the time that I actually had bipolar disorder. It was undiagnosed. So I think that explains part of it, just why my depression got so bad. It's something that most people it's a really hard thing, but that people just kind of cope with. I'm not trying to say my pain was worse than other people's, but a lot of people, they just cope a little better, I guess, than my coping mechanisms were at the time. And I actually had a lot of really hard things. I couldn't sleep. And that's actually what led into this a little bit. I was having a very, very hard time sleeping. I actually took Ambien at one point, which really kind of messed me up too. And I was drinking a lot, part of it trying to sleep, part of it just trying to kind of like numb the pain. So I remember this just kind of hit ahead. There was actually one incident where I took the Ambien and I tried to drive. It was at night and I barely remember that. So thank God I could have really hurt myself or someone else, but I just kind of hit a pothole. This kind of good Samaritan found me and helped me get home. And he was thought again, that could have been another horrible incident, but he was just a nice guy. He brought me home and nothing happened. I actually saw him in the grocery store later and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was thinking to myself, maybe like I'm not a particularly religious person, but I thought he was like a guardian angel or something. So that was one. I've always been very lucky. Like I've had these kind of brushes with death, and I've never actually experienced it. But the time that I would consider that was getting really dark was, I just couldn't sleep. I was crying all the time, kind of like isolating myself, having a really hard time. yeah, bed. And then this friend took me over to her house to stay the night because she's worried about me. And I remember she had this dog. It was like a little dachshund, like a wiener dog. And I was sleeping in her guest room, and I didn't sleep at all that night, like not a wink. I remember the dog kept coming over and licking my hand, like, he knew something was wrong with me. Oh, and I remember before that, she took me out for ice cream, and she was saying, I had so many good friends too who were, trying to help. So that's why I feel kind of bad that I slept on that place. But she was asking about my ex-husband, and she said, and I think she meant well, but she said some things like, oh, well, was he like your best friend? And I think she was trying to understand how upset I was. And you told everything to him, and he was kind of like your closest, like why I had this sense of loss. I said, yeah, he was like all those things. And then I just kind of thought about it more, and I tried to say she was responsible, but I couldn't sleep. And then the next morning, I remember I went back to my place. I was really out of it because I didn't sleep. And yeah, details are really fuzzy there. And I remember when my friends were trying to text me. I think I tried to text my ex-husband too. And then I just I didn't know what to do. I was so tired and so out of it. And that's why I'm saying I don't know how intentional it was at this point, but I was still drinking. I had some leftover wine, and I had some pills, and I don't even remember what they were at this point. I think I was still taking my anti-anxiety. I might have still had some sleeping. At one point, they switched me to trazodone from the Ambien, but I still had something to help me sleep. And I just, without even thinking about it, something I didn't have it was not rational. It was not a plan, but I just kept drinking and taking the pills. And I think my only thought was, I don't know what to do. And I just need the world to go away, or I need to switch, put the off switch on the world. Someone, again, thankfully, because I have such good friends, I think the one I was texting, or might have even been, I think my ex-husband might have been responsible partially too, because I texted him, but were worried about me. And, I guess, I don't even know, they found me kind of passed out, and an ambulance brought me to the ER. And obviously I was passed out. The next thing I remember is just waking up in a psych ward. And that was my first time that I was ever in a psych ward. And I was just like, oh, wow. I could barely remember what happened. It was very strange, a strange experience, but I did get better, and people came to visit me, and I realized how much they were worried about me, and that helped a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. It should be noted how important, and I don't think it gets discussed enough, is what lack of sleep can do to somebody.
Oh,
yeah. No, you don't hear that very often. People talk about all kinds of things, because I have some sleep, and it really just takes over your life.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how difficult. How long ago was all of that?
So that was way back in 2011. Yeah, around 2011.
Just so I'm clear, you just referenced two different, let's call them either attempts or almost attempts. The first one, car, Good Samaritan. The second one, at home, both with pills and alcohol.
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually wasn't even thinking of the car one. I don't think I even knew what I was doing. And I've read stories about people on Ambien who just get up and do stuff and they don't remember. And that's kind of like what it was. The second one, I was more, I guess you could call it that. The second one was more, and again, it wasn't planned or rational, but I was thinking more about, I had this thought, I just can't handle things right now. I can't handle the world. Yeah, that's the one I would call closer to a suicide attempt.
At some point, you're like, there's nothing else that's going to work. I get that. I ask this question sometimes, and it's sometimes semantics. Did you want to die? Or if I could tell you, you know what, tomorrow you're going to wake up and things are going to be okay, would you take that?
Boy, I mean, that's an interesting question. I would say, I think I would have been happy if I just kind of got to go to sleep. And that was that, at least in that point in time. Afterward, when people started coming to visit me, I started getting a little I got some sleep, I got some food and stuff like that and medicine, I wouldn't have still thought that. But in that moment, in that precise moment, and, it's kind of a cliche, how people say, like, I didn't really want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. That was kind of that experience. That was just, I just wanted to kind of go into a deep sleep, and I wouldn't have minded if I didn't wake up, because that would mean it was over. The pain was over.
So how long were you in the hospital that first time?
I feel bad admitting this because I had so much help, but I did that first time was maybe 5 days, but then I went back. There's several things, I guess, along the way you could say, but I kind of relapsed. So I guess that might even count as another. And again, it was just alcohol. I took some alcohol and pills, and it was like I couldn't handle things. So, yeah.
So you stayed in the hospital for 5 days. And then how much after that do you end up going back again?
No, it was really close in time. It was maybe like a couple weeks later. So that's why I feel kind of bad that relapsed so soon. I know other people do too. It's common, so I don't want to like draw any shame to it. But it's like I got better. All these kind of big challenging things were thrown at me, and I don't remember the exact timeline, but I think I had to move. It was shortly after that, and I can't remember if it was in between those two times. There was something about, and I just had my mind frame was so bad, and it was really hard for me to get used to this new place, and I was really worried about paying for it on my own. So, yeah, just kind of all these stressors. I came back and I felt better, but it's like they were all still there and I still had to deal with them. And then but it was really close. I had a relapse, and I would say stayed about another week. And then after that, kind of got on my feet after that second time. Yeah.
And at what point are you diagnosed with bipolar?
So that is interesting because I mention that because I think if I looked back at it through that lens, I think my emotions have always been really kind of strong and overwhelming, maybe beyond what a lot of other people would be able to cope with. So I think that was a part of it. But I actually so it's in another relationship, and I had a manic episode. In 2015, a really bad manic episode for like 3 or 4 months. Like it was a long one, and it was a really intense one. It was a bad one. So bringing in lack of sleep again, that's a common part of that. And I barely slept. Like that whole time I would sleep maybe 3 hours a night, but I was still, I don't know how much, I assume you know about bipolar disorder, but like I would get that much sleep, and then I would still feel so energized during the day. Like I have to get all this stuff done and random spontaneous stuff. So that was when that kind of came out. And when I kind of got diagnosed with the bipolar disorder, and of course I felt like on top of the world the whole time. I was so happy and euphoric, and a million ideas exploding in my brain all the time. Like I do this, I'm going to write this book, I'm going to do that, paint this, do that, make this movie. Then I had to crash from that. So that's the bad part. The crash is really, really bad. And it's very, very common for people who have a full-blown manic episode like that to try to end their life. I was so depressed. I was so depressed. I kind of cycled through medication regimens and stuff like that. But oddly enough, it wasn't until around 2018 that I really got seriously suicidal. And I think it was just because I felt like I've been dealing with the aftermath and the depression for so long, and nothing was working. Nothing. I had ECT. I did like the dramatic stuff. I had all kinds of medications, lithium, Seroquel, as like nothing was working. So I felt hopeless. And I had the PTSD of the things I did was manic, because it was a long manic episode. And I did a lot of things that were very hurtful to my friends without really realizing that I was doing them at the time. It's hard to control your behavior. And sometimes you can't even remember the things that you did. Some of them I don't remember. So I felt like I had the stress of trying to repair those relationships. Although I was lucky, a lot of people kind of forgave me and came around. I had really good friends. I had a good partner. We broke up, but he kind of forgave me, gave me another chance. But I still, and I think it's my own, I have to say a lot of it was my own kind of self-doubt and self-esteem, where I thought, yeah, that person forgave me and they're being kind to me, but I don't really deserve them. And I did this. And I couldn't stop thinking of that. I would have this PTSD, like I treated them this way and that means I'm not really good for them. So it was a lot my own thing, my own kind of self-defeatist or dark thoughts. But yeah, I tried all kinds of outpatient therapy. I went inpatient a couple more times. And I think it was just after all that kind of wore me down that I finally just thought, I don't want to live with this pain for the rest of my life, this horrible depression. That's another cliche you hear a lot, but that kind of, you feel like you're a burden on other people. I don't want to live with this pain. I don't want other people to live with this pain or feel like they have to take care of me or worry about me or whatever. So yeah, all that it was a gradual process. Wound me down to wanting to do it again. Yeah.
Let me back up for a second. So in that time, let's say between 2011, more or less, and 2018, are you able to work? Are you able to live kind of I don't like the word normal, but sort of typical life? Or is it just take over and you're...
That's a very good question. I feel like I've been really lucky in a lot of respects, which is probably why I've been able to come as far as I have with this disorder. I have a really good job with the city. I'm a librarian, and I took several leaves of absence, like FMLA, and I was able to do that. And I have really amazing health insurance. So I would say I still had a job. At times I was more capable of doing it than others. And there were a few times where it got really bad and I just had to take some time off to try to deal with my stuff. And it's interesting. I think I've heard some of the other stories here where they say their boss or their job kind of limited their duties or responsibilities a bit. And sometimes that happened with me. It's kind of like a plus and a minus or double-edged sword. I would kind of feel sometimes like I don't want them to treat me with kid gloves or whatever, or think that I wasn't capable of things. But at the same time, sometimes I wasn't as capable as I used to be. So it was a really hard thing for me. And everyone knew what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, people weren't condescending. They were just really trying to be nice. Like, do you need to take a break? We'll just have you do this for now, and then you can do that later. And I was very lucky in that my job was very understanding. They weren't prejudiced. They all knew exactly what was going on with me. They saw me when I was manic. I was at work and they saw me when I was manic. And they were actually the ones who told me, listen, you can't work here right now. You need to take a leave of absence. Because I was, I think I was scaring some people, patrons and staff. And so it wasn't one of those things where I could lie and tell them, I just went and had some random medical issue. They already saw it and they already knew. Right. So I couldn't hide it. And then, other things they knew about my other stuff. I also had a boss who was very understanding of depression issues because she had them too. When I would tell her I'm going to do ECT, I'm going to go away for a while to do this outpatient group, she was very, very supportive and understanding. So you just go do what you need to do. We don't want you here unless you feel well and feel like working and everything. So I guess that's a really long, rambling answer. But yes, I had a job, but I did take a lot of time off over the, maybe a few weeks, a couple times a year or something. So when I've heard other stories about people who this comes out at work or whatever.
Yeah.
And people, there's disability laws and you're not really supposed to treat people differently, but it happened. I know it happens. And so, I was lucky.
All right. So what happened in 2018? Not what led up to it, because I think you've kind of shared that, but you try again, right?
it's interesting because the first one was more active and then the second was like a lot more planning and very, very intentional. And I wanted to do it. I told everyone that, but I never got around to doing. But because of what happened before, I was trying to find like a drug that would really work. And like, it can't be like before, like this really has to work this time. And so I was doing all this research online and trying to find drugs, like the right drugs and everything. And I was trying to get a hold of the drugs. And I think that's when I kind of got intercepted by my family and my partner and everything. And they had me go to the psych ward again. Even there, I was trying, like, still scheming and still trying to get the drugs. I was there. That was a long stay. I think it was close to a month. And even the first week there, I was still like actively suicidal. If there could have been any way I got my hands on anything, or I definitely would try, or anything that I thought would work. I guess that was the key. I just really wanted, like, I didn't want it to be like before, where it's just like pills and alcohol and then wake up. That was a really good stay. That was a really long time. It was a better facility. And I know something people have talked about, it should not be this way, but it's kind of like you get what you pay for when you go to a psych ward, just like anything else. This was it was much more expensive. It was a much better facility, better kind of day programs and treatment or regimen and stuff like that. So that actually seemed to kind of get me back on my feet, really, for the first time in a few years. And I guess really it's not that. I thought my time was bad and long and everything. But again, just hearing other people's stories, it can take a really long time to recover from a manic episode. And that was like my first one. And I didn't know that I had that. And it was really scary and overwhelming. So really the fact that took a few years isn't really too bad. But I would say I was depressed and suicidal, really, like pretty much 3 years after that. And then it was just kind of everything kind of wore me down. It was more kind of a gradual, like, wearing down to where I just kind of felt like I just want to be over. But yeah, since that time in 2018, I mean, I definitely think about suicide sometimes, but I have not had an attempt, not really thinking about it actively. Yeah.
Wow. You're obviously comfortable to some degree talking about it. You reached out, you took the next step, and then we met and we're talking. So thank you.
Oh, sure. No, I think what you're doing is so brave. And I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. I think it's really cool that you've gotten so many people to open up about it. I'm sure it's really cathartic. It's hard. I was a little nervous, and I was thinking a couple of times, oh, do I really want to do this? But I think it's important. Like you said, it's really important to share the story. And I was thinking of some other people that I've met who have been brave enough to do that and are really advocates. And I thought, if they can do it, I can do it too. And maybe this podcast does that for people too.
Hopefully. Yeah. It might. A couple other questions. It sounds like, from what you've shared, friends that visited you in the hospital, you mentioned a couple relationships, family came up. It sounds like you have people in your corner.
Oh, yeah, I always have. I think that's really helped me. At times I feel guilty that it hasn't helped me more. And I know some people have been hurt or felt like, I don't know quite how to phrase this. It felt like I kind of betrayed them, especially when I would tell them sometimes that I felt better, then would kind of go and spiral again. And I can understand that. It can be very painful sometimes for family and friends to watch this kind of thing happen. If I think about suicide, I think about a couple of, my friends or family, and just how hurt they looked when they would come to visit me. And it just kind of pulls at my heartstrings. But I've been really lucky to have very, very supportive people. Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up two things that I think make a huge difference. I bring them up only as an observation because, to some degree, out of people's control, to some degree. One, I think if you don't have anyone in your corner, it's almost impossible to get better.
Yeah.
One person makes a big difference. And that is also cliche, perhaps, but You can't do it alone. I don't have the numbers on this. Maybe we could get the numbers if we dug enough, but the number of people who end their lives who have had a long period of isolation, I think, is rather high.
Oh,
I mean,
definitely.
it doesn't mean that people don't end their lives who are surrounded by friends and family and have a job they like. That happens too. But you will see a direct correlation, I am sure, with isolation/loneliness. And because when you're in that space, all the stuff happens. You drink, you drug, the non-sleeping, you have an episode and you're alone. It's impossible. The other thing, and then I'll shut up, is money.
Yeah.
Health insurance. Knowing tomorrow you're going to have enough money to buy food, all these things, man. And again, I bring them up because they're on my mind. I'm not suggesting a solution. I don't have one. So I'm glad legitimately that you have those things so that you can give yourself a chance at least, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting that you bring that up. I think in both of those situations, I think those are essential. But in both of those situations, I had kind of a false belief that that's what it was. The first time I had this very strong sense of isolation after my divorce, because that was the first time I ever lived alone. I just went from families to roommate to living with my husband. And I just felt I was sleeping alone. And even though I wasn't really alone, I had these people reaching out to me. It was just more aloneness than I felt before, I guess. And then also
just real quick, that is not, loneliness is not, I'm just speaking first person here. Yeah. If you're in a cabin by yourself for 9 weeks at a time, there's a pretty good chance you're lonely, but and I'm one of these people, I'm around people. It doesn't always matter.
Yeah.
Like you could have your friend. You're not asking me for validation or anything. I'm not offering it, but friends and family and people calling is not enough always. It doesn't mean you're not feeling profoundly lonely.
Yeah, no. And you make a good point. I wasn't isolated. Like what I said, I think it's kind of like a false notion. You're right. It's more like loneliness.
Isolation often leads to loneliness, but it is by no means necessary.
Right.
You're in Chicago. I'm in Chapel Hill. We're around people sometimes. Pay attention, man, because it doesn't mean because you see the person a couple times a week at work or at the gym that they're doing okay. It doesn't. And money, right?
And money. That was the other, like I kind of said before, it shouldn't be that way, but you get what you pay for a lot with, you can get what they call the new generation drugs. You can get better facilities for treatment. Yeah. I've experienced that. And I do have good health insurance. I think those times when I was feeling less capable, I would have this irrational fear that I was going to lose my job. And that was another thing that kind of haunted me. So it's like, even though it wasn't really, I don't think it was irrational. Everyone was like, oh, we'll support you, happy when you come back. I still had it. And that was one of the things I worried about, is then would I be able to afford my medications would be thousands of dollars if I didn't have my health insurance. I take a lot of medication. So yeah, no, that is really key, unfortunately, to getting some of the best treatment. Yeah.
This has come up a bunch in this podcast. You have a week stay at a hospital knowing you're going to get home and face that bill. That can't help someone's mental health. Come on.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to make somebody probably worse. It's not going to help. I know that. Again, I don't have an answer. I don't know. It seems weird to me. The people in your life, or at least some of them, they know that you have been near suicide. Yes?
Yeah, I would say actually probably most people who know me well know that, because I'm kind of an open book now, especially since I do the festival and kind of like mental health blogging and stuff. I'm pretty much kind of like an open book about it, because I have kind of like the same thought that you have. If you put it out there, then more people are going to respond. And that's actually, you've probably noticed, you said people aren't talking about suicide. That is one of the harder, I would say, topics to broach, but mental health has become a much bigger, I'm sure you've noticed, topic on the internet, on blogs, on Twitter. It's becoming much more open, I think. And a lot more people are talking about their issues with it.
Yeah. So. I think it's generational to some degree. I think younger people just seem to be a little bit more open.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a couple of questions, and then I want to hear more about the festival and the work that you're doing around all of that and related things. Up until 2011, in your entire life, had you ever thought about suicide?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say really thought about it, but when I do, sometimes I try to look back before that and think, where did this kind of come from? I definitely thought about, not actively, but I think I was very, very depressed. I guess it's normal as an adolescent. And even as a kid, I would sometimes feel really lonely, and I'd feel this kind of extreme sadness come out of nowhere, And I think that could have been what I didn't know. I had a mood disorder. And I think sometimes that's kind of the difference between, there's situational depression, and then there's, if you have a mood disorder, sometimes this kind of comes on for no reason, or you inflate something or take something that's not really, shouldn't be a reason. And you kind of make it a reason. So yeah, it's like poor emotional regulation. You have to work harder at it, I guess I should say. Put it that way.
Right. Yep. What's the work you're doing in the festival world?
Like I said, I think it fits with what you're doing so well, because that's the whole idea of what we want to do with that. And I actually did kind of come up with it and organize it and everything. I mean, it's a small grassroots. I think it seems like yours kind of is too, but film festival where people submit their films, and there's a lot that address suicide, but basically it could be any mental health topic, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or really just people who have, I try to be very open, have some kind of, like, not even necessarily a diagnosis, but some kind of episode, or they're scared of leaving their house, or just little things like that. So it's just all has to do with mental health. It has to have a theme of mental health. And then other than that, it's pretty open. So we've gotten all kinds of takes, interpretations, and some people tell me it's not too depressing, but people have submitted, even a couple of people submitted comedies about suicide. A couple of those. So all kinds of musicals, animations. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways you can interpret it. And you can definitely take a humorous take even on something. It's funny, I look back on things that happened to me that at the time I thought was horrifying, and now I can kind of laugh at it. So yeah, you can have all kinds of different takes. So lots of great documentaries. And like I was saying before, there are a couple that were really powerful kind of suicide awareness films. There was one, I don't know if I'm talking too much at length about, but there was a teenager who actually tried to, or she shot herself, and she survived, but she was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair. And now that's all she does is suicide awareness, I guess I should call it, is she goes and speaks about it and shows her documentary about it. So, but again, like you're saying, young people, I feel like young people are really into it. They're really passionate about mental health, which is really cool. But yeah, something really interesting she said too in her film was she didn't have a name for it, what she was feeling. No one ever talked to her about depression, anxiety. And she said, I didn't even know what that was. I mean, I'm sure she knew what it was, but she didn't know that's what she was feeling, and I think that's for her the reason it built up. So that's another reason to put it out there. And that's what she says too, is so people have more awareness of it before it escalates, and that this is a thing that other people feel, and it's a real thing.
What year did you start this?
2019.
And it is a film festival in which people submit, let's call them mental health related films. And then you curate the films, you choose which ones, or do you just play them all? How does that work?
I would love to play them all, but we do as many as possible. And I do always try to have at least a few people help me screen them, but we actually get so many. I mean, at least a couple, usually a couple hundred. So it's too many to really show all. So then what happens is we kind of look at them and try to choose kind of a variety of different topics. If there's a film about OCD or schizophrenia or some different facets of mental health, so that kind of weighs into it. And then a kind of different variety. I always like to have at least, a couple that are kind of funny. I try to do that. So it's not too heavy. We get movies from all around the world. So It's
Wow.
really cool to be able to show, stuff from all over. We had last year, there was one about depression from Ghana. And again, it was a teenage girl from Ghana who made this film about her depression. That was
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. So congratulations. That's pretty amazing in a relatively short period of time. When you say you screen them, because I don't know much about film, there's a physical location people go and it's like for the full day they're watching these different films.
Yeah. Well, the first year, 2018, we did it at a venue in Chicago called Comfort Station, which was a free kind of a little, kind of small, but multidisciplinary arts kind of place where they do art shows and they screen a lot of films. I mean, it's just about 25 to 30 people, and we screen them on a projector on the screen. Mm-hmm. So pretty kind of basic. But yeah, after the pandemic, we switched for the last couple of years and have done a virtual festival on the Eventive platform, which a lot of festivals are using too. My goal was always wanted to be free because I want everybody to be able to see the movies, kind of spread awareness. Usually I try to plan around October 10th, which is World Mental Health Day, and people can lock them and watch them for about a month. Kind of like a video on demand thing, if you like buy a movie on Amazon and you have a certain period of time to watch it. But this year I'm trying to plan a hybrid so that we just do like one night in a theater, but then also the Eventive. I hadn't planned on doing the virtual festival, but once we launched it, I really liked the fact that people all around the world can watch it. So, friends and families of these filmmakers in Singapore can watch it. So that was really cool. And there were definitely more viewers. Yeah. So
you're going to keep it going.
Oh, yeah. I love that. It's like kind of my pet project. And there's other people who are really into it now too, or involved.
We'll definitely put a link to that for sure. Very cool. So based on your own experiences, all the stuff you shared, in addition to this ongoing film project, there's probably a long list here. So I want to hear a couple of myths around mental health, mental illness, suicide. What are the ones that come up that you want to clearly and explicitly dispel as bullshit?
Nothing is ever kind of like concrete, but I would say number one is just because someone tries to take their life, it doesn't mean that they didn't care about you or you weren't enough for them, or that they didn't love you. You know what I mean? Or that they weren't even thinking of you. A lot of times I think people, from what I've experienced and heard, who get to that point, you're just not thinking of it that way. You're not, and you're probably not even thinking that. You're not. Or if you are, you're thinking maybe you're a burden to that person. So it's just whatever is distorted thinking. I just think it's important for people. And I know it's really hard for people. We've had a couple of films from that angle too, who are survivors of someone else's suicide. But I really hope people and I think anger is a very normal reaction. And like, this was selfish. Why did you do it to me and everything? But I hope people realize that that's probably not true, that person didn't love them,
Right. I agree. Yeah. This thing comes up a lot with people feeling like a burden. Someone in your life telling you, if you feel like a burden, that you're not a burden is probably not enough for them to not feel like a burden. And I wonder where that disconnect is. And I don't think there's an answer here, but I just think what people do both with their words and their actions. Here's the unpopular perspective. I think a lot of times people won't talk about this. I think people do think that person there is a burden. I think some people feel like a burden because the people in their lives feel like they're a burden. Because I get the sense that people hear the podcast and someone says, oh, I'm a burden. And people are thinking, you're not a burden. What I want to say is, there's a reason they think that. And it might not just be all because they're mentally ill. It might actually be that there are people in their lives who look at them as a burden and act that way. It's common. So I don't know why I'm on my little rant here. In your space and sometimes in my space, we talk about how important it is. Just talk, get it out, share it with the world. And I say, yes, but there's a reason why people don't. And if you've lived in the world and shared difficult things, it doesn't take very long for you to understand why people hesitate to share things. What I would love to communicate with people more than anything is not to the suicide attempt survivors what they should do. It's to the people around them and what they might explore doing? Because I think sometimes they're not helping in ways that they think they are. Does that make any sense what I said? Probably not.
Yes. No, absolutely. It's about the burden thing. So that's kind of part of what dissolved my last relationship. But that's a really hard dynamic because if you love someone, you want to be their caretaker. But like, how much are you their enabler? And, that person can really be a burden. And sometimes if they come to rely on you, they can become more of a burden, So it is a thing that sometimes if you think that you're a burden, you kind of are a little bit, like at one point I wasn't able to do that much for myself. And actually that's what led me to feeling very, very guilty and kind of, I knew that I knew that I was. It's hard because that can be the reality. Absolutely.
Do you think that moving forward, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, or if you do, please tell me. I want to know about that. Do you think that suicide is an option for you? Is it a possibility? Might you try again?
I really don't want to, but I don't want to say, I don't like putting definites on anything. And the way the world is going, who knows? I'm not saying that I could get into very deep depression again. I would try my best not to see people hurt or the way that I hurt them. But who knows if we descend into nuclear war or something and everything's, then I have some pills and I'm just like, it's the end of the world. I don't want to take any option off the table. I'm going to try my best not to. But it's interesting that you say kind of, Sue, and I don't know if this is exactly your words, but you're not quite suicide prevention, but you're more kind of like suicide awareness. And I know some people, I mean, this is kind of a different thing. This is going to go down a whole moral can of worms. It's way too much time to talk about. But some people think people should have the right to suicide for bad terminal illness and things of that nature. If your mental health is that bad.
Let me press this. Let me push this a little further, and you can push back. And audience, if you hear this, you can push back. Why can't I just have the option and I don't have to justify anything to you? What if I just don't want to live?
Yeah.
Just a thought. Why should anybody tell me how to live or not? I got to tell you, I lean in that direction. I understand the risk in the words enabling, particularly someone's like hearing this and they're younger, maybe, right? Because people make decisions like you, in part, it sounds like, and maybe, you look back, you're glad you didn't die. It sounds like, so you wouldn't want someone to do something that maybe it could have gotten, I don't know. Some people don't want to be alive. I don't know if it's always a sign of mental illness. It might be, I don't know.
No, you actually bring up a really good point. And I mean, you kind of took even further than I did. There's people who advocate, that's just kind of like in my personal sphere, like if you have a really bad terminal illness, if you're suffering demons in your head every day to a point where it's incredibly painful, like how is that different from a really painful cancer or something like that sits in your head? But that was just addressing one facet. But you're bringing up a very...
Well, number one, we are obsessed with keeping people alive in this country. We're obsessed with it. Suffering with cancer, we're going to do everything we can to keep them alive, period. Let me flip this, because one of the myths that comes up or conversation points that comes up all the time, suicide is not selfish. This comes up all the time. And when we talk about this thing, and I hear about people preventing people or keeping people in long periods of pain and suffering, I'm like, let's flip this and talk about selfishness in a different way. And who might be the selfish one here? I'm not trying to point fingers. Well, maybe I am a little bit. You're trying to keep somebody alive who's been in pain for years. Why are you doing that?
Yeah. Or why should that person stay alive just for you? To say something controversial too, like, if they're in that much pain, why should they make that sacrifice? It's a very controversial notion, but I actually...
why can't you talk about it? I
might get in trouble, but I kind of agree with you. And I've had this... It's an unpopular opinion.
Wait, who's getting you in trouble? What do you mean? The suicide police?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a pretty controversial opinion, but I do kind of agree with you that I'm kind of pro-choice.
Women many of them, I don't know how you feel. It's my body. Let me do what I want with my body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which
Mm-hmm.
includes pregnancy. Is it? And it might be an unfair analogy here, but is that different than me saying it's my body, it's my life, let me do what I want with it? And I'm not sort of formally or officially advocating for anything. No one really cares what I think anyway, Sharon. It just makes me, when you're talking about it and you said this thing, why can't people have a choice to end their lives if they're in these like long periods of pain? And then you're worried. It sounds like, oh my, well, I'm going to get in trouble. That is telling, not about you, but about a culture that just won't even have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even talk about it. Like, come on, what are we doing? Now I'm going on a bender. I'm not telling you what to do. I don't think I'm giving you ideas. We're just talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. That's just something where I don't know what it is. The government has a very strong interest in protecting life, even for really sick people, like physically sick people. I think, some of the court decisions and stuff I read about, they say there's always the possibility that people are going to get better, or there's going to be a better treatment, like some new treatment comes along. But if you take it's irreversible, basically. If you take the life away, it's an irreversible decision. So it's one of those really hard, kind of weighty moral questions.
It is. It also presupposes, and I'm not sure if I'm using that word correctly, that you're sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Healthy people don't think that way. Mm-hmm. Healthy people don't take their own lives. So by definition, if you're having those thoughts or act on those thoughts, you are in some way ill. I don't necessarily agree, because I think we could talk about all kinds of circumstantial things that lead people down that path. I just remember talking to my therapist. It's just one person's opinion, but he has done some research. I said, do you think everybody who tries to end their life is mentally ill, or at least by definition? He says, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Like 40% of the people are not at least diagnosed. Maybe some are undiagnosed. Maybe in like 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, we'll be able to know if you're officially mental. Like you could just look at someone's brain and be like, they definitely are, and they're definitely not. But we can't do that right now, I don't think.
Well, yeah, no, I don't believe that. People kind of like we were talking before. I mean, someone who's getting a really bad divorce who isn't mentally ill and is like losing their kids or what, something could be enough to push a lot of people to the edge without them actually having, chronic depression, where it's just really hard. And they're like, how am I going to, I could totally see that,
The argument that people will make is, well, there's a lot of people who are in similar circumstances and they don't take their lives. Mm-hmm. So if you're the person taking your life, and I don't know what to say to that. Like, okay, people handle things differently. We know that to be true. Some people get upset when someone breaks up with them. Some people get less upset. I don't know. At the end of the day, I like that there are no clean answers. Those are because things that are so black and white are boring to me.
Yeah, no, I actually like that you opened that up, because I was you may be able to tell I was kind of on the verge of going down that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a choice, but that is extremely controversial, and people you're right. That's something that people are not ready to say, that we shouldn't try to stop people. You know what I mean? Right. So yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if people will think differently in the future. I mean, people are already thinking differently now about suicide. They think of it less as like an act and more of kind of like, people say they died by suicide, like you die from a disease. Right. So that's kind of different already. I don't know if it will change anymore.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think there will probably, and I don't know this, of course, I also don't have a crystal ball. I think there will always be some stigma because it's irreversible. It does feel in some ways not natural. You can argue the one thing more than anything else that we're here to do is just survive and then create life. More than anything else, that's why we're here. You can make that argument. People make that argument. So by undoing that, it just feels like, there's a disconnect there, right? So I get it. And then you have we're not getting into religion, but you have that whole part. There's no room to talk because it's an absolute sin. So that's off the table. You also have a lot of people making a lot of money off of sick people, but that's also another conversation, Sharon.
But yeah, I mean, I guess to argue devil's advocate with that, there are a lot of people who have regretted their attempts or, gotten much better after it happened. So
that's a good point. You're making a very good point. Yeah.
A lot of those people would probably tell people who are thinking about it that's not worth it or that things got better. So
yep. I cannot argue with that. You're right. And of course we can't ask people who aren't alive and their suicide attempt was completed because they're not here. I can only talk to people who did not complete for one reason or another. I would like to talk to those people. I am very curious. And I would ask them that question. That might be one of the first questions I ask after we broke the ice, of course. I would say, yeah, are you cool with that? Did it work out?
I'm curious about that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard to be alive. It's hard work. It's painful a lot. Who knows what else there is.
That would be a cool movie idea. I'm going to do that. I don't know how to make movies, but how about the idea? Someone's going to take this idea and then pitch you and they're going to be in your festival and they get fucking famous and then they won't give me credit. Fine. People who have died by suicide. I don't know what the movie's structure is. I don't know. And they're reflecting back and maybe 2 people regret it and 2 don't. Could be an interesting movie. Maybe, given that there are millions of attempts every year, right? Millions. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You don't get a lot of movies given the numbers.
Yeah.
Given what's happening, versus, let's say, the art that is being created, it ain't much.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, some people call it a suicide epidemic, and it is. It's one of the biggest killers.
We can look at these statistics and say, okay, last year in the United States, an estimated 50,000 people ended their life, right? They died by suicide. We can estimate that for every one that died, 10 try. That means 500,000 people try. Ballpark, right? What I want to know, who is suicidal but doesn't try? Some of them will. Many of them won't. I would like to know that number because I would guess if 500,000 people try, millions. And I don't say that because I have a podcast and it's sexier. Millions of people are suicidal. Mm-hmm. Have to be. Just algorithmic, mathematically, it has to be true. So I don't know what that means or what to do with that, but it's just a lot of people. It's a lot of people for something that we have such a hard time talking about. That's what I don't understand. If it were like 34 people, like leprosy, shit, we should talk about that. It's an awful disease. Almost nobody has it here. I understand why it might not be a big conversation topic. Of course, if you have it, you want to find a community to talk about it, but this is a huge thing. That's what I don't get, Sharon. It's not a small thing.
This is something I kind of wanted to bring up in my story earlier that I forgot about, but I went to work. I think it was the night before I went and slept at my friend's house and stayed up all night. I went to work that day and I was just I think they all saw that I couldn't pull it together and I was crying and crying. And I went to my coworker and she's like, oh, you should go home. Are you okay? And I said to her, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And I was really surprised what she said to me. She said, I think about it every day of my life. I was like, wow, how many people just walk? But I remember what she said to me too. She said, but you don't like hurting people. You don't want to do that because you don't want to hurt people and you don't like that. So
you asked her if she ever thinks about it. Mm-hmm. She said, yes. You told her also you do. Mm-hmm. And then soon after that, she told you what to do.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she shouldn't or should do that. It's interesting to me. Shockingly, that wouldn't be my way of engaging, but I don't have all the answers either. I just have what I do. Maybe that was the right thing to you. Maybe that's what you needed to hear. I don't know. What do I know?
I think you're right. That's like the automatic response for most people. Don't do this to your loved ones. These things are going to get better. I mean, that's a lot of what I would say it's like 90% of what I would hear or what would you say to people?
I wouldn't say a damn thing. I'd shut the fuck up. To me, the most important thing and the only thing I can offer, what I can offer that I actually think is a legitimate, for lack of a better word, gift that I think a lot of people aren't getting is I would do my best to listen. And by the way, I'm not saying this to you as much as to someone who might be hearing this. That is not a passive act to listen. It's an active thing. And that's a skill and one that can be developed. And oh, by the way, some people are probably always going to suck at it, unfortunately. But it's not passive. So to engage somebody without doing those things like, hey, Imagine what it's going to do to your parents. No. Curiosity is such a powerful thing if it's real. One of the things I feel very blessed about is I'm just curious about a lot of things, especially this stuff. So if you told me I'm thinking about killing myself, I would really just mostly be curious about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would probably follow up and I'd probably say, I'm concerned about you. So what are we doing tonight? You want to talk? You know what I mean? I wouldn't just be like, all right, whatever. I'd be caring about it. If you want to go to the hospital, I'll drive you if that's what you want. But I wouldn't like make the person feel bad. I wouldn't try to make them feel guilty. I wouldn't try to shame them. I don't think that's what her intentions were. But to me, the most dangerous people are not the ones who are like, let's say, for example, really insulting and dismissive, because fuck them. We don't pay attention to them anyway, unless you live with them. Then it really sucks. It's like your parents. The dangerous ones are the ones that are kind of the caring ones, but they don't listen very well. Those are the ones that squeak through. They're like, all right, I'll give you a pass because I know you love me. But they're saying these things that are not helpful. Those are the ones that worry me the most.
And I think it's such an extreme thought or act or move or whatever you want to call it, that people do feel kind of obligated. If you're talking about something like depression, there'll be what's going on. Why do you feel this way? Stuff like that. If you're talking about suicide, and suddenly it's more of kind of like what people would consider like an emergency.
That's to me the part of the broader conversation is that, I mean, sure, if somebody's literally pulling a gun out, that's different. Then they're actually about to do it. Might be different than someone who just brings it up. They're not doing it right now. Like, take a breath, right? But I went to a conference on mental health stuff. And one of the speakers who I spoke with afterwards was the guy who, I don't know his exact role. He was the guy more than anybody else who would talk with people who were about to jump off of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was like, probably not only him, but he was one of the people. And I said, what do you say to them? And even in that case, when person's not just talking about it, but about to do it, nothing different. I just listened. He said the greatest thing I could do for them. And I think the thing that proved, I don't know if the word's most beneficial, because I guess his goal was to get them off the ledge, right? And hopefully they'd want to keep living at some point. But he said, yeah, just listen.
Yeah.
That was my long way of just saying, even in that case, that's what he did. So if he does that in that case, when your friend tells you at the coffee shop that they're thinking about it, you could do that too.
You bring up another really interesting question, which is like, where do you draw the line between what is a hypothetical or what is a plan? Usually what they would tell you is if you need to go to the hospital or need to talk or need help, if you have like a plan. That's usually the step, is an active plan. Are you actively planning? But what is an active plan? Right. Is it something that you've just thought about, like, oh, I'm going to go jump off this bridge? Or is it something where it's like, oh, at 4:00 p.m. on Tuesday when, my spouse leaves, I'm going to take this and this. And
by the way, I have no problem with that 4-step thing because I was a crisis text line counselor for some time. Yeah, that was it. Like at some point you always ask those questions. And then if they answer yes to that, then you ask the second one, the third one. Are you thinking about it? Do you have a plan? Do you have means? Whatever the 4 are, I forgot them for. Great. You have a plan. Now we can put you in a hospital. Mm-hmm. You're going to stay there for a week. You're going to get mostly ignored. Tell me if your experience was different the first time. The food was good, probably. You probably gained a little weight. They changed your meds. You talked to a real doctor collectively for an hour, and you got a big bill. Was I way off on that? Was that fair to say? Was that your first experience?
Yeah, I mean, the first place I went to wasn't great. So yeah, there wasn't much to do. But they fed you at regular times and gave you medication at regular times. I think just all that for me with no sleep and like not taking very good care of myself helped a lot. And then the visiting times. But yeah, I wouldn't say it was a great. But I mean, like transformed my mind or anything or changed my mind. Yeah.
I'm sure there are many people who have a plan. Excuse me. Someone intervenes, they go to a hospital or something, they get some kind of intervention and they don't try again. And they might even live a good life. I'm not saying that's not possible. It might even be common. I don't know. It's weird to complain about things and then not offer solutions. And I don't really have them other than my solution is just learn how to listen. That is literally the only message I have.
Yeah.
And burn your bills from the hospital because fuck them.
No, yeah. And what is the antidote? Some people go on to like me, they'll relapse very shortly after. That's actually very common, I later learned.
Right.
After they go to the hospital, what is the magic thing
I
to
mean,
do or say? But you're right. I think it comes down to support and finance are probably the two of the biggest factors.
right. Right. And how do you change that in someone's life? You don't. I mean, you can try with different things in a group here and some subsidies here, but they're probably returning to that life.
I don't know. My therapist used to say this, that your life force or your will is actually pretty strong and it's there. And if there's something that can kind of bring it out in you. So that's what people probably think they're doing. I mean, that's what my therapist said to me when I would talk about suicide. She'd say, your life force is very strong. It's hard to overcome it, and that's why a lot of people have a really hard time actually carrying out a plan that they have.
Well, I think we're designed to stay alive. I don't doubt that. Because you think about all the things that had to go right in your body and mind today for you not to be dead is astounding. When I learned a little bit about biology, I'm like, my God, there's like millions of things happening simultaneously, perfectly. The fact that we're having a conversation here, words are coming out of my mouth that you recognize is astounding. Yeah, so I think there's a total life force. But I also think sometimes the force dies.
I think people assume that's the natural state of things. The natural state of things is you want to live and there's just something wrong. I'm just going to say from their perspective, there's something wrong with you right now.
Right.
But that would be restoring you back to your natural state or orders that you would want to live. And that's people would even talk about it in those terms and kind of like old medical language. Like
maybe there's some truth to that. Sure. I mean, if somebody's been struggling for 30 years though, that becomes a bit of a hollow argument maybe. But then that people will say, like we talked about earlier, there will always be maybe new medications or treatment unless the world just ends or medicine ends. Yeah, there are going to be new treatments. There's going to be new medication. I mean, how long do you wait? I'm not saying I want you to wait. I'm just saying I understand people saying, you know what, I've waited for a really long time, and so I might consider that route. Is that crazy of me?
No, I totally understand. That's actually pretty much what happened to me after a few years of bipolar depression. I don't want to live with that for the rest of my life, So and that was only a few years. You're right. Some people have been years and years and in terrible pain. Yeah.
But again, my take on it, it's certainly unpopular, maybe even immoral or unethical. I'm not saying to do anything. What I am saying is, I think the idea of people having a choice is something I'm exploring.
Yeah. So it's one of those big moral or ethical questions I don't think has an answer. But you're right. I think people are there's something about that people are very kind of pushy and defensive about, or so like you can't encourage people or not even encourage.
Well, they would say that not actively discouraging is encouraged. I don't know if there's anything else I can think of like that. There probably are things where it's just, oh my God, how could you say that? I'll listen to the people who say I probably wouldn't, but if you have these like platitudes, you know what I want to say to them? If you were available in my life when I was really low and you sat with me, I'll listen, but you weren't. So I'm not listening to you now. But you know what I mean? Like if you were there for me and you listened and you were okay with that, then I'll hear you out, I think. But if you're not, and then you're just offering these like quick fixes, do you expect people to actually listen to you, or why would they?
Well, again, I'm going to just say on the other side of that, I think it's really hard for a lot of people don't know what to say or how to respond to that. And they think that's what they're supposed to, I'm sorry for your loss.
Sure.
Like you can't think of anything else to say for someone who just had death or so.
I appreciate your perspective because you're coming at it from a far more open and empathetic. But when do you stop giving people a pass for sucking at listening?
Maybe.
I mean, there's so many things that we will give people shit about, but not that. So I'm not saying you shouldn't give people a pass. I think it's a nice way to go through life because it's much more, there's a heart-centered approach, but it's too bad we don't teach this stuff earlier in life. Maybe, I don't know, I didn't learn it. I don't remember learning anything about that formally, certainly not. I went through some things and I remember I really want to be around that person and not that person and not all those people. What are those two people doing? Oh, mostly the thing they're doing is listening well. Let me look at that. All right. Maybe I should try that. Can I do that? Yeah, I'm going to try that because people feel less shitty when you do that around them. And that makes me feel good. It's pretty fucking simple, Sharon. It's not that hard. People train for years trying to like get better at piano. That's hard. Taekwondo, that shit's hard. Running a fucking marathon is hard. Shutting up and being a little curious, I don't know. Doesn't seem that hard to me.
It's hard for some people.
It is. No, you're right. It is. All right. So I'm going to be sending you my movie. I'm not sending you anything. I just would like to send you my movie.
Oh, no, that would be fantastic.
I don't know how to make a movie.
Oh, okay.
What I'm saying is the idea is there.
Is it the one about the people in heaven?
Oh, I didn't say they were in heaven. When did I say they were in heaven?
the after.
When did I say they were in heaven? Heaven and hell ain't have nothing to do with my movie. I promise you that. They'll probably be in like Denver.
Okay.
New York. I'll probably base it in like they're actually there. I don't know if they're like a ghost. It doesn't even matter. Maybe they're just voices. You don't even see them. There's all sorts of creative decisions. Hey, if somebody out there hears this and you want to collaborate on a movie with me, I can do idea stuff and you do everything else. Email me. I'm telling you, we're going to win an award for this shit.
So you believe in an afterlife, but it's in Denver, did you
Denver.
Say? That's where everyone goes when they die?
A lot of people go there. That's a question I ask people sometimes, especially if they've mentioned or brought up having that belief or having been brought up with that. Like when you were thinking about taking your life or when you attempted, did you think about where you were going to go? Heaven, hell? Those are interesting moments.
Right. Yeah. I guess heaven is just my shorthand for, I was kind of raised in Episcopal church and that's just what I first think of because I don't necessarily think of hell, but like, I don't know. I think for my own personal belief, I don't know if I really believe in an afterlife.
Interesting. All right, cool. Well, listen, I've kept you long enough. Thank you so much for talking.
Thank you. This was so interesting. Like, I don't know. I didn't expect to get into some of those really big moral and philosophical questions.
Thank you, Sharon. And hey, I hope your days are at least decent, if not better.
Oh, thanks. You too. You too. Right. Thanks for doing what you do.
Have a good night in Chicago.
Thanks.
All right, bye.
Bye.
As always, thanks so much for listening and all of your support, and special thanks to Sharon up in Illinois. Thank you, Sharon. If you are a suicide attempt survivor and you'd like to talk, please reach out. hello@suicidenoted.com on Facebook or Twitter @suicidenoted. There are also a few links in the show notes. The first link is another way you can reach out by leaving us a recorded message. There are also some links on how you can help us out with a financial contribution if that's something you'd like to do, and we would, of course, appreciate it. But no matter how you support us in this podcast and these survivors, thank you. And that is all for episode number 132. Stay strong. Do the best you can. I'll talk to you soon.